Ex-racists of Reddit, what made you change your mind? Sesame Street. I'm not even joking. Was raised in a slightly racist household in a pretty racist state. Seeing kids of all colors playing together made me wonder why my mom wouldn't let me play with certain people. It kind of snowballed from there. My whole family is quite racist. When I was little I was trying to wrap my head around the rules of the world, so I thought it was as simple as different teams. Blacks vs whites was just like the Red Sox vs the Tigers. Then my grandmother starts going on about how horrible Polish people are and how I'm never to talk to them. So I'm psyched. Screw those Polish people, whatever color they are, we are mortal enemies. Then she points out our Polish neighbor to me. But she's white. I point out to my grandmother that she's white, so we are on the same team. My grandmother says no, that she's a mixed breed. I point out that my great-granddad was a Shoshone Indian and that I'm a mixed breed. She says that doesn't count. That's when I realized she was just making up the rules and I wasn't going to play games with someone who couldn't stick to the rules. Was raised in a racist and closed community. When I joined the army and met different people, I'm Asian and I grew up kind of resenting my parents for being different than my classmates' parents, and I hated that they didn't know how to speak English. I had to translate for them all the time, call phone companies, go to the DMV with them, translate documents, etc, and I grew resentful. So when I was in elementary school I told them that I wasn't Korean, but that I'm a full-fledged American and I wasn't going to speak Korean anymore. I also hated interacting with other Asians. That reminded me of my parents' ACA textbook internalized racism. It wasn't until middle school when I had a teacher that validated my culture and actively tried to communicate with my parents that I realized that bilingualism is an asset and something I should be proud of. Now I'm going into teaching and have done some translating work on the side. People say my Korean is super fluent for an American-born Korean and I really have my parent to thank for that. Now I'm super regretful for hurting them like that. Edit. I should note that they are not fluent, but can speak conversationally. Edit. Yes, I have apologized to my parents about my actions and behavior in the past. The biggest way I was able to so was by dedicating my college commencement speech to them. I'm extremely regretful and sorry for my actions, and I still help them with translating, and I'm happy to do so. I'm incredibly proud of them, and as an adult I'm now aware of their sacrifices. I had a super racist grandpa and uncle, both pieces of shit supported by my grandma. I would frequently stay with them while both my parents worked on Saturdays. I would pretend around them when I was younger because I wanted them to like me. I don't remember this story, but my mom will tell it so proudly. If the subject of racism comes up, she was very different from her dad/brother. I was maybe 6 or 7 when one day I was crying when my mom picked me up, and the whole way home I just sobbed like my heart was broken. I wouldn't tell her what was wrong, but I cried quietly the whole way home and went right into my bed and laid down crying. My dad and her came in and asked me what was wrong. I still didn't want to tell them, and my dad got a little gruff with me. Boy, you tell me what's wrong right now. If somebody hurt you or told you not to tell me. And I guess I started crying loudly for the first time and blurted out, Grandpa and Uncle Chuck said I can't be friends with Malcolm anymore because he is a dirty N*********. My uncle made me call him and say that to him. My mom immediately flew into a rage. She went down there and, from what I told, beat the living shit out of her brother, told her dad that I would not be coming over anymore and that he was no longer invited to any family events. She then drove to my friend's house with blood from my uncle's nose still on her shirt, apologized profusely for what happened, and told them the story and that I had been crying the whole time because my uncle made me do that. We had dinner the next day, and instead of going to my grandpa's house on Saturdays I ended up going to my friend Malcolm's house. My uncle used to be the most racist person I knew and it drove me crazy, but he is an old white man and set in my ways, is what he would say when confronted. It all changed the day his great-granddaughter was born. His granddaughter had married a black man, and he was unaccepting until that baby was born. She had him wrapped around her pinky finger from her first breath. Since then there are several mixed children in the family. It's awesome to see the difference in his behavior. He genuinely loves them all and accepts the racially different spouses of his grandchildren and their children. If he hears anyone being racist, he shuts it down. College roommate was Muslim. Definitely was not a terrorist. Kinda already knew my paps was wrong about that. But when you live with someone for an entire year, it takes you from kinda already knew to holy shit, that way of thinking is fucked up. I never made the choice really to be racist, but I grew up in South Mississippi and my family wasn't overtly racist, but they were the kind to say racist things behind closed doors and didn't allow us to watch TV shows such as The Cosby Show or Fresh Prince, and definitely no rap music in the house. I absolutely fell in love with a lot of black artists in the early 90s. I loved the hip hop scene at the time, and holy shit, Fresh Prince was the best sitcom on television. I played football with 80% black guys and worked at Pope's Chicken with over half the staff being black. I guess you can say my own real world exposure, despite their attempt to shelter me, changed me. I cringe at some of the vernacular I used in my early youth, as the N-word was the same as black in my house. I literally was not raised to know that was a bad word. I'm glad that from the age of maybe 12 on I learned to love all people on my own. A guy I worked with said he was neo-Nazi as a teenager and ended up in prison somehow. He hated Jews for some reason, and blacks. He was never clear on why, just that he had so much hatred in his heart, and that was his outlet. He was in prison for many years. I think he almost killed somebody by beating them up. So, many years later, and in prison there was a mentor type staff there, and this one lady was so helpful to him, and she cared about him so much that it really started to get into his head the idea of being a positive person. Then, he learned that she was Jewish, and he said he couldn't believe she was so kind and caring despite the fact he was a claimed neo-Nazi. From that day he swore to be a better person. He learned his lesson. He's a pretty great guy these days, doing his family thing and making sure his son grows up with lots of love and all that he didn't have. Really remarkable, great guy. I wasn't actively racist when young, but my surroundings did affect me. I never once considered myself racist until I started noticing that at times I would look at a black person and think they're lucky for living in my country, Caucasian majority. This made me start to question myself. Why was I having those thoughts? I guess I had just been subliminally raised that way. You see someone dirty, you think ugh, take a shower. You see someone black, you think ugh, go back to where you came from. Only after realizing this did I start to actively try to rewire my brain, so to say. Glad those times are way beyond me now. My grandma grew up in Virginia in the 1900s. Being racist is just the default setting. Nana loved her family more than anything, though. So at one point in the late 1980s, she met her first not 100% white grandkid and discovered she still loved him. She made astounding late life progress, accepting that darker skin toned people were not only people, but family, friends and welcome in her house. Not myself, but many former racist, or at least, now less racist, friends of mine were able to have their minds changed just by simple exposure, especially to non-whites that didn't fit the stereotype. At first, it starts that they are just one of the good ones. But after a while, when they meet enough good ones, they start to realize that the good outnumber the bad and their racial worldview starts to crack. Doesn't work on them all, though. Some are racists due to education and esteem issues, but many are racist simply from lack of exposure to other races, only having what the media/environment they live in tell them to fill in that gap. I wasn't an actual racist per se, but I definitely had a stereotypical idea of how a group of people is because of the action of the few, or because what I have seen on the media. What made me change? Well, I saw a video of a writer named Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She spoke about the dangers of the single story, and that video changed my life, and it opened my eyes. Check it out on YouTube and write Chimamanda Ngozi, Dangers of a Single Story. I grew up in a city where there are way more people of color than there are white people. Ever since I was 11 or so, I'd get beat up or humiliated simply because I'm white. I was pretty much afraid of anyone who wasn't white until I got out of high school. I don't know if that classified as racism, since it was just fear. Once I was out of high school, I realized that most people aren't like that in the real world. It was just the thing to do at the schools in my area. Probably still is. Sadly, every school has a minority that go through the same issues. It's fucked up.